Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome to another informative, exciting, and just an enjoyable episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose. Thank you specifically for your continued listenership, and thanks for subscribing to this podcast, whether you're on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify, or these days even on YouTube. Every subscriber counts, including you. I know you're going to like this episode as well, probably more than most. And for that reason, go ahead and click the like button and definitely share your comments. We're excited to have Lyle with us today. Lyle, thanks for joining us.
Michael, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I really appreciate it. Lyle, inquiring minds want to know, were you born this way, or how did your life come to intersect with the valuation and appraisal profession?
Yeah, it depends on how far back in time you want to go, but I will say that I never heard of appraising. I was not conscious of the appraisal profession until I was in my late 20s.
You and me both.
But to really understand me and what makes me tick, I think, first of all, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my parents, how they raised me. We were raised in a devout Christian home, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One of the things that we believe is in being honest.
Yeah.
And that is something that has really permeated my approach to work, to life in general. And of course, another really important virtue is service. Or, as Christ said, losing your life to find your life of others.
What was it like for you growing up in a family of faith with such values and virtues?
Well, for one thing, it was what by today's standards is probably kind of a big family. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Oh, okay.
So we all had to learn to get along. I think intrinsically, our Christian faith is an optimistic one. We believe that Christ paid the price for our sins and weaknesses and inadequacies, and that a glorious eternity awaits us. And that sort of puts a lot of things in this life into perspective. A lot of things aren't really all that important, right? What's really important is how you treat your neighbor, and whether you are true to your virtues and your values. And the outcomes don't really matter. There's a book by Albert Schweitzer where he wrote about his experience in the German concentration camps. He was in a concentration camp. And he talks about finding meaning, finding joy in what's really horrific circumstances where most of the people in those camps died, right? And they died horrible deaths. And yet life was precious to them, and they found joy and meaning. And I think, that I am grateful that my life has not been tragic and difficult in that sense, but so much of what we worry about in terms of work and finances and homes and things, this really doesn't matter. What matters is how you treat people and whether or not you're ethical.
Yeah, I agree. Very much understand and appreciate that perspective. The day-to-day is rather insignificant.
However, we do have to make a living somehow.
Yes, we do.
Bills, and that's part of the service, right? And so I've approached my professional life from the perspective of I have my own family now, and I need to provide for them. That's part of my responsibility as a parent and a spouse.
Yeah. So speaking of which, you mentioned all the siblings. Were you the oldest, the middle, or the youngest?
I'm the second.
Oh, all right.
Second is a nice spot to be in. I got some deferential treatment for not being the youngest, but the oldest sort of paved the way and took brunt of the, you like to think of as parents, that first child is an experiment, right? You're trying to figure out how to be a parent.
Everything that does work and doesn't work is working out on that first one. And as they say in the Iditarod race, they're kind of the lead sled dog, and the other ones get to kind of follow in path and get a little more leeway, maybe a little more room to move around.
Yeah, my older sister, she's another person who I am really grateful to. She's a great friend, one of my best friends. We still talk all the time, and
That's great.
I've learned a lot from her.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. So for you growing up, were you kind of have a normal childhood, or did you start out working when you were younger, or doing kind of like, I know for me, I think I had my first job when I was 9 and worked every summer since then, but it turns out that's not always the case for other people. How was it for you?
Yeah, we grew up in a small town in the Midwest in the 70s, and we were poor. Everybody was poor. We didn't even realize how poor we were, right? I remember in high school, I wore hand-me-down disco shirts from my cousins who were older. And I was happy to have the shirts, you know?
I'm with you. I lived in my cousin's hand-me-downs. I totally know what you're talking about.
I mean, I looked like a clown in hindsight, but you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, I worked. My brother and I had a lawn mowing job. We probably spent more of our dad's money on mowers and gas and equipment than we actually earned, but we tried.
Oh, I appreciate that. That sounds awfully familiar too. I used to mow fields. That same kind of thing. And then, of course, couldn't drive, so Mom had to actually drive the wagon with the trailer on the tractor on it and take me out there and drop me off, pick me up like 6 hours later.
Parents work harder than the kids sometimes on that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir. That is definitely the case. Wow. Was your family one that encouraged the kids to go to school? Go on and get education?
Yeah. Education was very important in our family. We all went to college. I think 4 of the 5 of us have at least master's degrees.
Oh, wow.
There was always a lot to read, a lot of discussion in our house about events, economics, philosophy, and science, and just we were a very inquisitive bunch. We had access to whatever we wanted to read, really encouraged to be intellectually curious.
What a unique experience. Not that parents don't encourage their children to be curious, but to be intellectually curious and for you to really recognize that access to, be it economics or science or other things. How did that shape your future? I mean, were you like Elon Musk, where you saw some particular sci-fi guidance as a young kid and you dreamed one day you're going to put everybody on Mars? Like, did it influence you that way, or?
Okay, so a couple of stories. I always loved science. When I was, I was probably in middle school when, I don't know if you remember, the King Tut exhibit went through the United States.
Yes.
And I wasn't close enough to a big museum or had the funding to get to the exhibit, so I didn't get to go see it. Mm-hmm. But my parents got me a book about King Tut, and man, I labored over it. Like, I learned everything you could know about King Tut, and it was really interesting. Wow. For a long time, I wanted to be an archaeologist when I grew up. Oh, no kidding.
Fascinating.
So I got old enough to figure out archaeologists don't make any money, and maybe I should rethink that, right? So I picked a couple other professions which didn't make any money either, and just continued the trend.
So you spent some time hammering rocks, is what you're telling us early on.
Oh yes, yeah. So went to college.
Yep.
I went to Brigham Young University.
Okay, BYU, sure.
Yeah. I needed a science elective. I always loved science. And chose just off of the list of potential electives, I chose a geology class. Little did I know that geology class had a field trip to the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is about 5 or 6 hours south of the campus.
That's cool.
So we took 3 or 4 days and we went to the Grand Canyon. And this is like an introductory level GE course. I'm like, wow, I love this, right?
Yes.
Just get to take you to the Grand Canyon. So I did get an A in that class, and the teaching assistant came to me afterwards. He said, Lyle, there's a mining company in Nevada that wants to hire undergraduates for a summer internship, field associate, right? So
yes,
opportunity to go do some geological tech work. And at that point in time, I didn't have a summer job. I didn't have any plans. I needed money.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like,
yes,
okay, I'm in, And so I applied and I got the job, and I went and spent the summer in Nevada, and I learned an enormous amount about geology. And I came back from that really persuaded that I wanted to major in geology, become a geologist.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I thought any job that'll pay you to hike around the mountains and classes go to Grand Canyon and it's science. It's just fun, right? So I became a geologist, and I went on to get a master's degree in geology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And shortly after I graduated, a couple of things happened which were really important to my future. One was I got married.
That's important.
Yeah. And my wife, Lisa, was also a geology graduate student.
Oh, okay.
2 years behind.
So you all, I mean,
yeah.
Was that just amazing? Did you just like stare at rock formations together all the time? I mean, wow.
Our first date, I invited her over to my place and I cooked her dinner and I showed her my rock collection. So
I love it. Oh my gosh, that's lovely.
Who else can say that, right?
Nobody, Lyle, nobody.
So she's still in school and I'm graduated and I'm working. But the kinds of jobs I were finding were these temporary geology jobs where I'd go out on a project for a while and the project would end and then I'd, kind of be in a hiatus until the next project came along. I worked for, believe it or not, there's temp agencies for geologists. So I was signed up with this geology temp agency. And whenever there was a project that fit my skills, they would send me out on it. And a lot of this work involved travel. I might be gone 10 days and then a long weekend. And my wife was like, Lyle, you need to get a real job, one where you have continuity, where you know where your next paycheck is coming from, right? And she said, my uncle is an appraiser. He's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and his business is growing. And we've been talking about you behind your back and wondering if you'd like to give this a try. So in my next break, I went to Albuquerque and I took my qualifying education and I hung out with her uncle and started to learn the business.
Wow, that's how you started to learn the business. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I found out there were some similarities between what I was doing in geology versus what an appraiser does. In geology, you would go out to a site, you examine the site, gather evidence, maybe gather samples, do research, learn about what other scientists or researchers had done in regards to like this particular type of geology and what the problem was that you're trying to solve.
Yes.
And you'd assemble this into some sort of written report that you would provide to your employer, right? So, or client. And in appraising, you're doing exactly the same thing. It's just instead of rocks and geological science, you're talking about housing and economics and, market theory. So I just had to learn a new toolkit, but the kind of the process or the flow was very similar. Now, appraiser is a lot. I hate to say it because I might get some complaints from appraisers. Appraising is a lot easier than geology.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, look, geology, pardon my ignorance here, but it's been around a little bit longer than, building buildings on top of dirt of some capacity.
The life cycle, the cycle time is faster too. Like you can take an appraisal from start to finish in, half a day. If you include from order to delivery, maybe a week, right? Whereas with geology, projects last longer and take more time. But it's a kind of a similar thought process and similar flow. And I found it to be an enjoyable work. Once I learned kind of the housing toolkit, I was good at it. I knew how to write a report, I knew how to think, I knew how to analyze data. That's impressive.
So I imagine that you took to this quite with ease because it was a process that was not, in a sense, new to you. I mean, like you said, the site visit, the go examine, gather the evidence, then do research, might inquire what other professionals have approached a similar situation, and then compile your results in the form of a report or summary that goes to, in this case, a client. I mean, that's a great setup to step right in.
And a lot of people ask me if I miss geology, but when we take vacations, we're usually going outdoors and we're seeing geology, and I tend to read about it. And so, I don't really miss it. I still enjoy it as a hobby. Now, here's another point where I would say I owe an immense debt of gratitude to a couple of people in school, in graduate school. There were two gentlemen on my thesis committee. They're professors of geology. One of them, his name's Eric Christensen, and we called him the data monster. He may not know we called it that. We called him the data monster because he went around, he collected sets of data on different rock formations whenever he could get his hands on them. And he kept them on these floppy disks that he had labeled. I think remember what a floppy disk is, right?
Yeah.
So he had this enormous collection of floppy disks full of petrology data, and he would, if we would be talking about my thesis and the analyzing of data that I had gathered, and he would say, well, here's how someone else did it. And he'd go grab a floppy disk and open it up, and it came up in a spreadsheet, and we would work through that, right? So from him, I learned how to use a spreadsheet and how to collate data and how to analyze data and really how to use data in a scientific way or in a rigorous way. So
yes,
very important to my future, just his emulating him and his discipline in being really data centric in his approach to science. The other professor that I mentioned, his name's Myron Best, and he did so many things well. I just can't get into it all. But the one thing that I took away is he really taught me to write concisely and rigorously, right? To be a professional in how I write. So when I was about a junior, I was taking a class from him.
Yep.
And part of this class was we studied certain volcanic type rocks. And I had to write a paper about a volcano. And at the same time, I was taking a technical writing class. And I needed to write a paper for them about just anything by choosing something for my profession, right? So
of course,
I'll use the same paper in both classes, right?
Oh, nice.
So I wrote this layman's level paper for my tech writing class.
Yes.
And of course, the teacher there knows nothing about geology, and he's just like, this is great stuff. I appreciate it. But I was writing like for National Geographic. I'm like,
oh, okay.
Boom, right? And just, not very scientific. And I turned that paper into Professor Best, and he just beat that thing to pieces. It's like, this is so unprofessional. Where's your data? Where's your analysis? You're not using professional terms, technical terms. He bloodied it all up, and he made me rewrite that paper, right? And I learned so much from him and that experience. So that wasn't the only paper I wrote from him, but just the process of working through writing the thesis and the edits and the continual editorial process that we went through really helped train me to write very concise, specific, say what you mean what you say, use the correct terminology. And I think that's helped me a lot in my career.
I'm encouraged to hear that you got that type of exposure and education, because writing is difficult, and writing well. Writing in and of itself isn't that difficult, but writing well is difficult. And like many things, it does get better with time, but it gets better with time with continuous improvement.
You have to be deliberate.
Deliberate.
This doesn't happen by accident. So I'll give you just one quick example.
Please do.
Reflexive verbs.
Mm-hmm.
I was invited to do this podcast. Think of how that conveys a different meaning than Michael Hobbs invited me to do this podcast.
Got it.
It's almost the same thing, but one's an action verb, Michael Hobbs invited, and the other's a reflexive verb, I was invited. And it conveys a completely different tone. If you want to persuade people, you need to use active verbs, not reflective verbs, and reflection verbs. And that's just one little thing that I learned from them. It's like they wouldn't tolerate sentences that start with there. There was a volcano. No, right? That's not acceptable. That's not how you write. No reflexive verbs, no verbs, passive verbs, all active verbs. That's how you write persuasively. And that's just one simple thing, but you have to be disciplined. As you edit, you have to be thinking about what you wrote and said, oops, accidentally did that. I got to unwind that, right?
Yes. I have such appreciation for what you just said, just thinking through a number of the courses I've taken and challenges I've had over the years with writing. And that choice, as you said, active choice for active verbs as opposed to passive and reflexive, truly shifts.
One of the things it does is it creates accountability. You know who did what. It's just more transparent it's also more persuasive. Like, I own it. I really believe this, right? Because I'm saying I did it.
Oh, that's good. Oh man, I feel like we're back in the class. Got like a nun out in front of me, like beating you with a ruler. Oh my goodness, you don't do it that way. That is good learning there. Holy cow. So I can only imagine that your reports must have been concise, crisp, and well supported with that type of background.
Well, I tried. And you're always learning new things. So
yes.
When I first got into the business, I borrowed a lot of things from my supervisor, my wife's uncle, my mentor, wonderful appraiser. He's an old FHA HUD appraiser, really good in business. But sometimes as a trainee, you don't have access to his life experience. You're only getting through this filter, right?
Yep.
So you don't necessarily know why he tells you to do the things you do, but you do them anyway. And so I had to learn and grow through some of that. Like, I remember one of my earliest appraisal assignments. It was a really simple assignment, small house.
Yeah.
And one of the comps had a different number of bathrooms, and so I asked my mentor, "How much should I adjust for this bathroom?" He's like, he did one of these. I'd give that about $2,000.
Yeah, it depends on which side of the finger you lick as you stick it up in the wind as to tell you which side the adjustment's on.
Now, I know that he knew where that came from. And in inflation-adjusted terms, that might have been a reasonable adjustment for the day. But I didn't know where that came from. I'm just happy, $2,000 and moved on, right? And then I used $2,000 for a bathroom for the next 6 months until one day I had a problem where it just wasn't working. And I'm like, something's not right here, And then you learn from that.
Oh, that's so good. It's so true. I can very much appreciate the totality of the impact of that statement.
So I became an appraiser, and I appraised in Albuquerque for about 8 or 9 years. Great experience. Really loved the business. Loved seeing the different architectural styles. It's a window into the soul, really. People, the old saying that your house is your castle is true, and the house is a reflection of your personality and your values. Just really interesting to see all the variety. Albuquerque got a tremendous architectural variety and very robust housing market. Very different geography. If you go east of Albuquerque, just a little ways to get into the area called the East Mountains, which is pine trees and steep topography and snow. And, if you go down into Albuquerque itself, it's a desert, but then in the bottom, it's a river with a river valley and cottonwood forest. So there's just it's a lot of diversity and really a great place to learn to appraise. We had everything from high density urban condos to rural farm and ranch. So I got a really good education, residential appraisal.
It's a wonderful place to visit. I remember I took a course. I think I took one of the premieres of the sustainable buildings courses. I think Sandy was teaching it in Albuquerque. It was the first time I'd been there. And my wife went with me and we spent the weekend out there. And beautiful place, beautiful part of the country, housing style I'd never seen before. As you talk about the diversity and as well as the topography out there. I was like, I can see why people live out here.
And there's another person who I just owe a great sense of gratitude towards. His name is Warren Payne. Very generous and taking me in under his wing and taking me into his business, teaching me how to do this well. Just really appreciate that.
Wonderful. It sounds like maybe you didn't stay in Albuquerque.
Yeah. After, early 2000s, I was feeling like I was starting to get good at this appraisal thing. And our family was growing. We had 2 kids. We had a third one on the way. And I just felt like there were some things about being a fee appraiser that didn't sit well with me.
The market right now is tough for appraisal companies. Many companies are having a hard time getting enough work with the same marketing they used to. Is your company struggling, having a hard time getting new customers, or getting additional work from existing customers? The answer to this problem is easier than you think. Do more business with the people you already know. Over 10 years, the average U.S. appraisal firm meets over 17,000 potential customers. That's a lot of people you could be doing business with right now. but it's a big problem if you don't have a proven process to communicate with them. StoryLex turns this problem into an opportunity to grow. Our advanced AI marketing tool can rebuild your contact lists and harvest long-forgotten communications. Imagine reaching out to everyone you've ever met with just one click. For the cost of 1 or 2 appraisals a month, StoryLex helps you reconnect and market to people who already know you, like you, trust you, and want to do business with you. Act now by contacting StoryLex today to turn your business growth dreams into reality. Email appraisal@storylux.com. That is appraisal@storylux.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode.
And maybe it was a little bit of the product of the time. We were starting to see a lot more subprime lending activity.
Yes.
And this caused some business headaches for us. We're starting to see more AMC activity. So I remember one time we had this lender that I'd never heard of, out-of-state lender, called us up and said, we're moving into the Albuquerque market. We're going to do a lot of business. I want to know if we can send you 15 orders. Yay, 15 orders. All right. So send us 15 orders. And they're like, we want you to just kind of gut check these, the lender's estimate of, or the borrower's estimate of value. These are all refinances. And just make sure we're kind of in the ballpark before you move forward. Well, I went through those 15 orders and they were all just crazy. People like, oh, my house is worth $500,000 in Albuquerque, it's worth $100,000. They just they had absolutely zero clue what their house was worth.
Yep.
And I think this was sort of a reflection of the sort of the desperation in the subprime market. But in any case, I ended up calling that lender back and we canceled 14 out of 15 orders. So I worked half the day to figure out that I was going to cancel all those orders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of times we would not get paid. You do the appraisal, you turn in the appraisal, and then for some reason that loan wouldn't close, and they'd call you, and you'd call them up and say, hey, where's my fee? And they'd say, well, the loan didn't close. I can't pay you. We didn't get to collect. I'm like, thanks for collecting your dance, right? So we had lots of problems like that. If you told me, I would have picked up a check. But you're talking about borrowers who don't have a check, right? They're desperate. So some of that, just some of the overall pressure, even from our good clients, to try and hit values was always distasteful.
Yes.
And so I thought to myself, I'd kind of like to apply this skill set, but maybe could I find a different way to use these skills? And I started looking around. I found a job with a servicing company, a loan servicing company.
Oh, okay.
And this required us to relocate to California. And it was a review job. So I reviewed appraisals and broker price opinions for loans that were delinquent or in default.
Sure.
And here I had a couple of people there just tremendously wonderful with me and training me and positive influences. One's Connie Kress, she hired me. Great mentor. And then Natalie Waterhouse, who really taught me to think like a risk manager.
Yes.
I'm not sure if Connie's still in the business or not, but I know Natalie, at least until recently, was still doing review work. And she had a wonderful way of thinking through the problem and figuring out whether it was important. One of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to figure out early on if it was a good situation or a bad situation. Did we need to drill down or could we let it go, right? So if you got an appraisal, do you trust that appraisal or do you not trust it? You want to trust it as long as it's reliable, but how do you decide quickly? It's a business, right? You want to process as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so she taught me all kinds of ways, techniques to think about risk, whether or not this was a risky proposition that needed more research, or was it a safe situation where we trust the appraiser or the broker and move on. I used to look at anywhere from 30 to 50, even 60 properties a day.
Oh, yeah.
Not in person, but just in
of course,
right?
Data and everything else.
Think about that. Think if you're looking at 40 properties a day times 250 working days, that's 10,000 properties in a year. Well, as an appraiser, if I could look at 500 properties in a year, that was a miracle. So this is in 1 year, I saw 20 years worth of appraising. And
Yes.
What an education. And it was the weird stuff. The stuff that goes to serious delinquency or default is quite often unusual properties. Because there's all kinds of off-ramps. If you've got equity and you've got a marketable property, you're going to sell that house rather than allow the bank to take it in foreclosure, right? So the fact that it got all the way to foreclosure or even passed it into REO tells you there's often something unusual about this property. So imagine looking at 10,000 unusual properties in a year. What an education. Mind-blowing.
Yes.
And it helps you also help me understand the consequences of some of the decisions I was making as an appraiser on the front end. There was one case when I did a loan that was in default where I was the person who did the origination appraisal.
Oh,
and that was really fascinating to see the difference in attitude from when I appraised it.
Wow.
Versus when I had to think about it from the bank's perspective. Very, very informative, very useful feedback loop for me as a person.
Oh, that's huge.
So a great experience there. And I was in San Diego for about 3 years, and then they said, Lyle, we need someone with this valuation expertise in our Texas office. So they relocated me to our Dallas, Texas office.
Well, I mean, it's not the worst place in the world to be in San Diego. I mean, weather's pretty good there.
Weather's great. Springtime, flowers blooming all year round. We had 3 little kids, and we were we had all the memberships for the San Diego Zoo and for the Sea World and all the fun stuff that there is to do there.
It's amazing. And so you get to go to the Great Republic. You end up in Texas.
Ended up in Texas, yes.
Oh, wow.
And working for the same company.
Okay.
Got here in 2006. And I think your audience all knows what happened in 2007, 2008. And my world blew up. The volume of default and delinquency default on REO just went off the charts, right?
Yes.
Another thing that happened is the company, for whatever reason, this was above my pay grade, they decided to close that San Diego office.
Oh, wow. So talk about some good fortune shining down upon you.
And most of the folks who worked there in that San Diego office were Southern California natives. They wanted to stay in Southern California. They really weren't that interested in Texas, which is one of the reasons why I ended up being the person to move, because I was the non-native. I wasn't really anchored.
Yes.
But after they closed that office, then all the valuation function moved over to Texas, and my responsibilities grew immensely. That was another pivotal point in my career.
It's fantastic. Wow. And so for people who haven't had an opportunity to do review work in any capacity, much less default servicing, would you say the skill set is similar to appraising? Is it a different skill set? Does it require more coursework? Or, because you and I are aware there's an awful lot of review work that goes on, and a lot of people are not exposed to it, but it may be something that they should consider.
It requires you to be really well grounded in the fundamentals. You have to be able to kind of recognize quickly whether or not the work that you're reviewing reflects the marketplace.
Yeah.
So a lot of appraisers are trained around use path. They're trained around report writing, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think appraisers pay enough attention to the actual marketplace. And when you finish a report, you should always gut check. You should always look at it and say, if this was my house,
yes,
and I was putting it on the market, do I really think in my heart of hearts it's going to sell for that number that I just put on the bottom line?
Yes.
Or invert that and say, if I'm a buyer in this marketplace and I'm presented with this option, this house at this price, am I buying or am I staying on the sideline? Or do I think this is a fantastic bargain where I'm jumping in with both feet, right? Self-assess. Think about it through that lens of, is this really what the market would do? And in review work, at least at places where I've worked, our philosophy was we didn't care about complaints. clients.
Yeah.
We cared about, does this information drive business success? We
Yes.
have the right answer. The right answer trumps everything else.
Yes. Couldn't agree with you more so. That is a wonderful way to put it. I am a huge fan of review work because I think much like the work that you were in position to do back in the times that changed from 2006 onward, I was pretty good. But my background came because I was a very good investor in property. So I had a whole different skill set.
So that's right. You know, if you're buying and selling and trading properties, then you kind of see the outcome of that. You know when you made a mistake, like I overpaid for that property. And you know when you got a deal, like I underpaid.
Exactly.
On that one, right? And
yes.
that kind of experience, extremely valuable for an appraiser and for review appraisers. Like, can you predict what the market is really going to do?
Exactly. And then having had the opportunity I learned construction and remodeling and rehabbing from the ground up. And then, you know, I joke with people all the time. I said, given a choice, I love people with dirt under their fingernails and blood on their knuckles, from like actually being in the trenches and learning, you know, failing and learning and applying. And then you get into review and it's like, holy cow, it's like a whole different, almost magnifying lens that I'd not previously been exposed to. And wow, it felt like the old Star Trek episode where warp speed ahead was an experience.
Now, I hadn't mentioned it, but during that phase, when I was newly married and doing these temporary geology jobs, there was a period of time when it was wintertime and no one was doing geology because snow was covering all the rocks.
Okay.
And so I didn't have anything else to do. And I went to work as a framer, as a carpenter, building houses.
Oh, really?
And I only did that for 3 or 4 months, but great fundamental experience for becoming an appraiser later on. When people talk about how a house is put together, I had a clear picture in my head of how a house is put together, right?
Yes. Oh, what? The simple things, like when people throw out MEP and you're like, what is that? You're like, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and the chase and the space and where things run. And
what's fire blocking? Why do you do that? What's a hurricane clip?
What do you mean 16-inch on center? What's that all about?
What's
Who
that
cares?
all about, right? Just really good fundamentals for anybody in the real estate business to know, especially for an appraiser. So when I was working for the bank, and this is 2006, 2007, relocated to Texas, and the way when I first started, the way we managed our workflow is we had some secretaries who would receive the appraisals and BPOs in email, and then they would print them out. And every day they would produce a stack of reports, and on that stack they put a sticky. And the sticky would say like September 4th.
Okay.
And the next day they would print another stack, and they put a sticky on top, September 5th. And when it started to get busy, we'd get a little behind, right? So there might be multiple stacks for different days, and you were expected to take the reports out of the oldest day, off the top of the oldest stack.
Oh,
right?
Sure.
Well, weird things used to happen. Like things would get lost. Nobody knows who they were or where they were. I'm sorry. And usually it was the weird ones and the hard ones that got lost.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah. So there was limited accountability because of the way we were distributing work. And I think the management had the idea of creating an electronic platform so we wouldn't have to print everything out.
Mm-hmm.
So that started to come to fruition in 2006, 2007. And I was the SME, the business SME on the team that put together the business requirements for the platform and then worked with the developer to create the platform.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a great experience. Got me really involved in the tech side for the first time. And it was really good time. And we decided to do appraisals in XML format, which was really new, cutting edge technology. No one was doing XML appraisals. There were some companies out there who did digital appraisals, but they were getting PDFs and then sort of scraping PDFs.
Yes.
which is very different than having a true digital XML appraisal.
Yes.
So we created an XML appraisal platform. Our vendor was Veros.
Oh, okay.
That's the vendor that won the bid. And
Yep.
so I worked with Veros on creating our proprietary XML appraisal platform. Does any of that sound kind of familiar? I don't know if you know, but the Uniform Collateral Data Portal built by the GSEs
Yes.
is an XML-based appraisal platform built by Veros.
Yep.
So essentially, they took our platform and improved it and upgraded it and sold it to the GSEs.
Good for them.
So, but I had a unique understanding of that platform. So fast forward a few years, and what Fannie Mae was doing, beginning in 2010, Fannie Mae launched the Uniform Appraisal Dataset. So they required appraisers to deliver their reports in XML format.
Yes.
And beginning in 2011, they launched their UCDP platform, voluntary adoption until March or April, I can't remember which, maybe April of 2012 when they made it mandatory.
Yep.
So from 2012 on, all appraisals, all loans sold to the GSEs with appraisals had a digital appraisal received through the UCDP.
Yeah. Totally makes sense.
Building this enormous database of appraisals, right?
Yes.
And one of the things they were doing is analyzing that appraisal data, and they were trying to build a quality control tool for their internal use. So,
yes.
Again, all this goes back to the financial crisis, 2008. The GSEs were overwhelmed with this wave of default, and they were going through the appraisals on those defaulted loans to try and find out if the appraisal was part of the problem, if the appraisal was defective. And it was just too much for the size of the team they had. I know they hired and grew their team as fast as they could, but they were looking for ways to make the team more efficient, put more information in front of them. Looking for ways to triage and differentiate between appraisals which were likely problematic versus ones that were unlikely to be problematic.
Exactly.
So they're using this appraisal data to build to inform their platform, so to speak.
Yes.
So they built this platform and they were using it internally, and it was so good that they thought we should give this to lenders, have lenders fix the problems before they deliver the loan.
Yes. Move it earlier in the process. Like earlier. Move it sooner in the process. Eliminate the errors.
Well, Fannie Mae has relationships with like 1,200 lenders.
Oh, okay.
And lenders, particularly the smaller lenders, don't necessarily have specialists, right? So they wouldn't necessarily have a collateral specialist like we could hire at Fannie Mae. So about this time, they noticed that the bank that we worked for had really clean retail appraisals.
Oh, okay.
So they came to talk to us about it. They're like, what are you doing differently? Now, I'm working on the servicing side, the back end, but I have a peer on the same team named Zach Dawson, who's working on the front end.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to drop a couple other names here. So the manager who really helped my career in terms of making me the SME on this platform and, helping me to develop our team there in Dallas. His name's Randy Ritterman. Gave me a lot of opportunity to grow, really made me feel confident in my abilities as a review appraiser.
Love that.
I owe him a big debt. And so Zach and I both reported to Randy. Zach was doing front-end originations, and I was doing back-end servicing, but we're both using this same XML-based platform, this review platform. And Zach was really successful at delivering a clean product, right? And Fannie Mae noticed, believe it or not. They're like, wow, your appraisals are great. What's going on here? Your defect rate is super low. And they came and talked to us about it. And so we started to develop this relationship with Fannie Mae in terms of just, comparing notes on appraisal quality. And fast forward a couple of years, in about 2012, they hired Zach to go work on the development of their QC platform. Right?
Oh, okay.
So Zach's over there working at Fannie Mae, and we keep in touch. And one day, 2013, he calls me up. He's like, Lyle, we're going to roll this thing out to the lenders, and I need help. It's too big. I need to manage. I need somebody who knows the platform and knows the business. I want you to apply. So I applied, I got the job, and work at Fannie Mae. And my first task was to manage the team that rolled out collateral underwriter to lenders.
What a step in, both to something brand new and yet familiar.
Yes. Yeah. Now, being at Fannie Mae, I'm now focused on front end, whereas before I was focused on back end.
Yeah.
I think going from back to front is easier than going from front to back. When you're working in servicing, you see all the warts and you have to solve every problem. Like if you have a property in REO, you're going to have to sell that property. There's no way around it. Like you can't just turn it down. You've got to solve the problem. You've got to figure out what to list it for, what to sell it for. You've got to solve the valuation problem. You can't just turn down an assignment, right?
Yes.
So you learn to deal with it, and you also learn where your pain points are. And that's really good feedback for the front end policy apparatus to say, okay, here's where you get into trouble. Here's the kinds of things that cause you problems, right? So I found that transition from back end to front end to be, there were things I needed to learn, but it was not too bad. It was not too big of a stretch because that back end experience in default, I always keep that present in mind. Like what's going to happen if this loan goes bad?
Yes.
And that's a great lens to view your front end valuations through. In any case, we rolled out collateral underwriter. It was a huge success. And that opened a lot of doors for me. I was asked to start speaking to lenders and so at some conferences about collateral underwriter and about, the way that we view appraisal risk. And then turns out I was okay at that. Took a little practice, but I got better at it over time, but I was okay at it. And so they were like, well, Lyle, you can keep doing this. And our chief appraiser, Bob Murphy, he retired in 2016.
Oh man, he was a great guy.
Yeah. And then that created a lot of new opportunities for me in terms of beginning to work more on policy and having more of a public presence.
That's amazing. That's what a time of change that Bob Murphy lived through and brought the industry through.
And I still, Bob will still call me up or email me once in a while. He'll see something that comes out from Fannie Mae and he's like, what are you clowns thinking over there? And we'll have a chance to talk through it. And it's
Bob.
It's great to have his perspective on things. He's got a great view of the GSE space.
He really does. Really, always appreciated the time to connect to him and just tell stories. It was Bob had filled with lots of wisdom, but had just a real astute and acute way of communicating that really cut through a lot of the noise. And I definitely appreciate that about him.
So here we are. I think that kind of brings you up to today. I mean, I feel like, in terms of my career, some of the fundamentals have been intellectual curiosity, always willing to learn more, always wanting to learn more. I would say gratitude. So many people who have mentored me and helped me along the way. I've mentioned several of them today, but just
appreciate
that people who give back and people who are willing to take a chance on a younger person.
Yes.
That's been huge for me. And then, my own attitude has always been, I try not to be territorial. I just want to help solve problems. I just want to, and I want to be data centric about solving problems. So anybody who comes to me, if I've got capacity, I'm going to try and help them. And if I can share some nugget of insight that helps them take another step forward, then I'm going to do that. And what I've found is when you're more focused on solving problems than on grabbing your domain, or carving a place for yourself, the opportunities always arise. Let's say I teach someone how to do what I do and they get better at it than I am.
Fantastic.
It turns out Fannie Mae doesn't fire me. They just have me go work on additional problems because there's always more problems, right? And they know a problem solver and they know they can trust me. And so there's always something more to be done if you approach with that attitude of I'm just going to do whatever I can to help around here.
Love that. I absolutely love that. Well, I mean, given everything you've seen and everything you've experienced and even the rock formations that you think about, what has you, as you look out over the next 3 to 5 years, what are you most optimistic about or looking forward to?
Well, I am looking forward to the implementation of the new UAD.
Mm-hmm.
The original UAD was first pass at it. It was, I think, an excellent first pass, but a lot of guesswork, right? You didn't necessarily know what you were going to need in terms of data in 10,
Yes.
15 years. And if you look around, our whole world has become more data-centric. Digital data is just storage space is cheaper than ever.
Yes.
Internet has made it easier to move data around. And
Mm-hmm.
every industry, every profession, every avocation is becoming more and more data-centric.
Yes.
The mortgage business is becoming much more digital, much more data-centric. So we're going to see that trend continue. And
Yes.
UAD is going to be part of that. We're going to try and cure some of the gaps in the original UAD that make the report a little stronger, a little easier to read, a little more transparent.
Like that.
Now that's going to impact appraisers in more than one way. So appraisers are going to have to learn it, right?
Yep. Gotta learn.
I don't think it'll be terribly hard to learn, but it's also going to mean here's not just from the new UAD, but from other technology impacting mortgage business.
Yes.
When I first got into the business, now I'll tell you, New Mexico is a non-disclosure state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a lender in New Mexico, you
Yes.
want to QC my appraisal. At the time, you had no QC data. You didn't know if the comps that I gave you were real or not. There was no way for you to find
I never thought about. I've never worked in a non-disclosure state. I never thought about that.
You had to trust me. That was your only source of data. Now, fast forward to 2024. And so appraisers really, even going all the way back to the Great Depression,
Yes.
The appraiser was a data gatherer. The appraiser was someone who had relationships in the community with lenders and real estate agents, builders, and home buyers, and they fostered those relationships to gather data and use that data to illustrate the market. Fast forward to today, there is a lot of data from a lot of different sources.
Yes.
And we really don't need appraisers to be data gatherers so much anymore. Maybe to some degree, maybe in some situations.
But not all of them.
But not nearly as much, right? Because the lender's already got a ton of data. And the amount of data just keeps growing. It's not just the UAD. It's like everything. Like in every conceivable way, our business is becoming more data rich. So the task for the appraiser now is actually harder and more true to USPAP. USPAP defines the appraiser as someone who formulates an opinion of value in a professional way. It doesn't define them as a data gatherer. They're analysts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what appraisers are going to have to be going forward as analysts. There's going to be a ton of data, more data than I could have dreamed of when I started in this business. But sometimes that data won't agree. Sometimes that data will conflict. Sometimes that data won't produce an obvious right answer. The appraiser is going to be the one to sift through all of these disparate data sets and sort out the conflicts and figure out what it's telling us about the marketplace, right? That's going to be the role of the appraiser going forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing this transition. And I think the new UAD is like the first big step here. It's designed with this in mind. It's designed to enable the appraiser to really move past being a data gatherer and become an analyst. Demonstrate how they analyze the marketplace within that report.
I think that's going to be transformative. I mean, it's one of those where, fortunately, people in the industry are capable of doing hard things. And the reason why we know that is because they learned how to walk and they learned how to talk. I mean, you got to figure, you start out with, in this case, little human being with a heartbeat, and they go and accomplish great things. this is an iteration. It's not a transformation. And it's just a matter, like you said, there's some learning ahead, and people are going to be better off as a result of it.
And, another thing that we always keep in mind here at Fannie Mae, so many of us came to Fannie Mae during or shortly after the Great Recession. We are in conservatorship, which is not a nice thing. And we've been in conservatorship a long time. And we're always very conscious of those dynamics that put us in conservatorship, those dynamics that led to our downfall, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so much of what we do is about risk management. It's about avoiding that, preventing that from ever happening again. And one way to prevent that from ever happening again is to be really rigorous in our analysis and consumption of data.
Yes.
And really demanding in getting accurate data.
Yes. I think you've summed it up well. And that is for those that have not had I'll call it the privilege of going through hard times. As you mentioned, you didn't know that you didn't have a bunch of financial means until you realized that the clothes you were wearing didn't look like what other people are wearing. I mean, until you've gone through tough times. And I'm not saying everybody needs to file bankruptcy, but until you've gone through some really rough times, you just don't understand how resourceful you can actually become. Because, and I think I heard it first. I was introduced to the author by Tony Robbins at one of his, I think it was Business Mastery. And I think Turning's the author. And it's called oh my goodness, I can see the book. Fourth Turning's the name of the book. Pardon me. It's the name of the book, not the author. And it discusses this fascinating phenomenon, which is exactly that you speak to, Lyle. And that is that tough times create strong people, and strong people create good times. And then good times actually create weak people. And it's this cycle, and it's gone on for hundreds and thousands of years. It's gone on through, and we're talking empires type of thing. We can go back, I can't say in perpetuity. We were talking about eternity earlier. But I mean, this is one of those times where this is setting us up in a good way to be stronger and wiser for the future. And some people aren't going to like change. It's just the way it goes.
Well, change is a part of life, whether we like it or not.
I mean, it's amazing. Lyle, I'm sure you don't have this problem. You seem to be eternally youthful. But there are days now I wake up and I'm like, I feel like I must have worked out while I was sleeping. I'm like, how do I have pain getting out of bed? This is crazy.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel my age. But I'm excited about the future. And I'm excited about the things that we are putting in place here in terms of how it's going to improve Fannie Mae's function and how it's going to make for a better appraisal process. There's so many good, positive downstream implications for the work we've been doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I'm excited for that, and even more encouraged because as that, I'll call it iteration, if you will, that evolution occurs, it better prepares people in this profession to actually do this type of work in many other places. I mean, when you get good at data analysis, you're valued in many, many parts of many economies, not just a real estate valuation one. And I really think it's going to open up significantly more doors going forward than many people, not all, but many people have even considered.
People ask me sometimes, Lyle, there come a day when we don't need appraisers anymore? My answer is no, I don't think so.
No chance.
We're always going to need appraisers. The role's going to evolve some. But like we talked about, right, there'll be a focus on how to grapple with too much data, how to make sense of a lot of data, how to get more precise answers, more accurate answers. I think we want to shift. This is something that at Fannie Mae we talk about a lot. We want to shift from appraisals being supported, the word that has been in vogue because it's sort of anchored in the USPAP concept.
Yes.
Of following a certain prescribed process.
Yes.
And we want to really shift the focus to the appraisal being accurate.
Yes.
And that's not a USPAP concept, right?
No.
But my experience is that there is a right answer.
Yes.
And we want the right answer.
As you said earlier, the right answer rules.
And the right answer, it's right in front of us. If
Yes.
you go back to the definition of market value that's printed in every GSE appraisal report,
Mhm.
if you comply with that definition, you're going to land close to the right answer. That's what it means.
I agree. You summed it up well. That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate this time together. This is, as I knew it would be. This would be fun. It'd be fascinating, and it's definitely been informative.
Michael, thank you again for inviting me and for giving me a chance to get a little bit personal, share a little bit of my experience. It's been a wonderful journey for me. Really enjoyed my career. I love what I do at Fannie Mae. Just deeply appreciative for all those people and that have touched me along the way and all the opportunities I've had.
And that comes through clearly. And I appreciate that you've taken the time to share that. That's the meaningful contribution that this podcast is allowing others to see that there's so many opportunities and possibilities. And no one of us is an island, and all of us can continue to improve and grow and impact others. And along the way, take care of good things for other people, and things tend to come back to you as well. Well, Lyle, I appreciate it again. Thank you so much. And everyone, I knew you would. Go ahead and like the podcast. Make sure to abundantly share it as you've continued to do. And thank you individually for your time here listening to Lyle share a little bit about his perspective in and through the profession. Lyle, have a fantastic day.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Appraisers, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.